Good afternoon. Welcome to Fridays with Friends. I'm Geraldine DiBianchi, the Mobile Justice Squad attorney at Coast to Coast Legal Aid. Joining me today to shine a light on Suicide Prevention Awareness Month is Paul Jaquith. He is the CEO and president of Mental Health America for Southeast Florida. Paul is a licensed certified social worker, and he has a lot to help us through this discussion with his background and insight and resources. So thank you for being with us today, Paul.
Thanks, Geraldine, and good morning. Well, I guess it's afternoon now, so I'll say good afternoon to everybody. And thanks for the invite to speak to your group. As Geraldine said, my name is Paul Jaquith. I am the president and CEO of Mental Health America of Southeast Florida and Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention. And I'll tell you more about how that came to be. So part of what I want to talk with you all about today has to do with general mental health, general mental wellness, and then lead into a discussion and conversation about suicide, both what we call postvention and prevention. Because we do a lot of work in the community. Mental Health America has been around since 1957, providing services to the community. And we started as a advocacy and peer-based organization. So we were one of the first to introduce the idea of peer program under the mental health subject line, if you will. Mental Health Association, which is what the original name was started in Connecticut by a physician who interestingly had suffered a mental health breakdown and was hospitalized. And as a result of being hospitalized in a psychiatric institution, recognized the inhumanity in the way that people with a mental illness were treated, including being locked up, being chained to beds, being shackled like prisoners. So it was his mission from then on to give a voice to those people who have a mental illness so they're not treated that way. And we've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but we've come a long way. In fact, in the 1970s, MHA, as it grew, sent out a call to all the institutions, the mental institutions, and said, because they stopped using the shackles and chains, and said, send us your shackles and chains. And they did to Mental Health Association and National, and they melted that all down and built a bell out of it. They took it to a foundry in Philadelphia and built a bell. So part of our logo is a bell, and that's what it represents, is to free people from the shackles and chains that once held them captive. So, we talk a lot about stigma and shame, and it has a very early start in our history as a country, as a society, and it's something we continually battle and fight to make sure that people understand that mental illness is not it's not a death sentence. It's not an end of the road. Actually, for a lot of people, it's liberating because now they understand what's going on and they can receive the intervention that they need. And we know that in 92% of the cases in which people get treatment, they improve. And that's not to say that everyone does, but a vast majority of people do get better through a combination of medication, therapy, what have you. And there's all kinds of therapies out nowadays that will help people depending on what their diagnosis is. So if I were to say to you, 1 in 4 people suffer with a mental illness in our country. And some people would say, well, I'm one of those 3 then that don't. So I put it in another perspective, and it's this. Let's say there's a new lottery system, a new lottery game, and you had 1 in 4 chance of winning $1 million. Most people would rush right out and buy as many tickets as they could because they got to figure my odds are really good of getting this $1 million. When you flip it and say, chances are 1 in 4 that you'll get a mental illness, all of a sudden all bets are off, literally and figuratively. So think in terms of who we all work with, who we all interact with, even in families, a lot of times it's mental illness that's not even talked about. I hear from people all the time. Now, you know, Uncle Bill, when he comes to the Thanksgiving, he always gets a little crazy, and he gets, you know, into fights with everybody, and gets angry or drinks too much or what have you. Well, you know, Uncle Bill probably has a mental illness. It's either undiagnosed or he's got an alcohol problem or what have you. But everyone kind of goes along with it, you know, because that's what the family allows or dictates. And I always say that families are better than the CIA at keeping secrets, because a family secret is a well-kept secret, and everyone knows their role in the family, what they're allowed to ask about or talk about, and that makes this condition even more serious for people. We know that on average, when people start first experiencing symptoms of a mental illness, on average, they wait 7 years before they seek an intervention. That means 7 years of damage that is continually going on within that person, and it's a brain illness. So imagine if you had a heart condition and you were having chest pains and you let it go for 7, you probably wouldn't be able to, but let's say you just let it go for 7 years. Imagine how much damage you've done to your heart. So it's the same thing with a mental illness. The longer you wait, the less likely you are to get help or to get effective help, because it's really start to get intractable. So it's really important, particularly if there are parents on the call, you know, keep an eye on your kids. And I always say parents know, they just know, they feel it in their gut when something is not right. Compare it to other kids, you know, that their child is in trouble more than other kids, and for, you know, like things you just don't understand what's going on. It might be time to get an assessment and find out what's going on. And there should be no shame about it, but there still is. I mean, that's the human condition, and that's a lot of the work that we do is getting the word out. Some of you may be familiar with this, that the last 2.5 years we've dealt with a pretty significant disease, which is COVID, and that's resulted in people being isolated, locked in their homes, if you will, you know, or in front of a screen like this for hours on end, including children. And we are wired as human beings for human connectedness. When we don't have that, when we have it this way, it's not the same. So what starts to happen is you lose some of that, especially for kids. You know, there are kids now who literally, for their entire school life already, they only know this kind of work. I mean, they've just been back to school maybe the last year and a half, but that's been their experience. So for them, now they have to kind of figure out how to navigate being with other kids. It's really challenging. And it's not just kids, it's also adults. Mental Health America National has a screening tool that you could go on their website. And it's a self-screening tool. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just they just track data. And during the pandemic, we saw something like a 200% increase in stress-related anxiety, depression, all those things that come along with that. And you might say, well, you know, that's just a normal reaction, and it is. However, when you're under stress, which is what happens, there's a chemical that gets released in your body, a physical chemical called cortisol. Cortisol has an impact on your blood vessels, on your heart muscle, and the more you get exposed to it, it's like the fight or flight or freeze syndrome, right? So if you're faced with a very stressful, all of a sudden, let's say it's a car accident, there are people who will run to it and help. There are people who will run away from it to get away from it, and there are people who will just freeze. But in all those instances, what's happening is because your body is now producing this cortisol, it's having an impact on your physical being. It actually has a physical impact on you. So, you know, a lot of times stress is kind of seen as, you know, it's stress. So it's, you know, but it's not. It really has an impact on you. We know in law enforcement, for example, law enforcement they deal with stressful situations all day on their shift, and it can come on like a split second. And now they have to deal with how do they release some of that and some of that tension. So there's a lot of things that go into all of this conversation, and that leads me to when we talk about suicide. And there's another concept, shame and stigma. We'll talk about that. There's another concept called trauma. And trauma can come in many different varieties. For a lot of people, trauma can be early childhood trauma if they were exposed to a parent that was incarcerated, or if there was fighting in the house, physical fighting and verbal altercations. If maybe someone was sexually assaulted, whether it was by a family member or someone else, or a fire in the house, all kinds of things that can create trauma. And as we go through our lives, there's no way we're going to go through our entire lives without having some traumatic event in our life. There have been studies that showed that after 9/11, and for those of us who were around in 9/11, we remember that day very clearly, vividly, right? And so they did some studies, and they compared people who were actually in the buildings to people who weren't even in the state at the time. And they were able to show that there were people in the buildings who recovered okay. They moved on with their lives. And there were people in California, for example, who were so traumatized by what was going on, they could barely function. So that tells you that trauma doesn't have to happen directly to you. In fact, what happens is it gets triggered by other events. I was just at a conference this past week, and a gentleman was talking about how he had been traumatized as an 8-year-old. Actually, he was a former football player, and he was sexually assaulted by a family friend at 8 years old. Fast forward to when he's an adult, he's in his 30s. He was home one day. There was a CNN story on about some crisis that was going on, and he realized he was being triggered by it, even though he wasn't paying attention to it, and it had nothing to do with him. So he was recognizing in his own body, because he got to a place where he began to understand how his body reacts and responds, both mentally and physically, to trauma when you're exposed to it. So as we go through this discussion, keep that in mind, because that's kind of a theme throughout the whole thing is depending on how people deal with trauma, will have a lot to do with how they deal with their current situations. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they're experiencing trauma or that they experience trauma. For a lot of people, it's how it was in my house. So what? My parents got into fistfights. Doesn't everyone do that? And when they start to get older and they start comparing notes to other people, they get in relationships themselves, and now all of a sudden, they don't understand why the spouse doesn't understand. It's okay if I swat you now and then. Like, why would you have an objection to that? Because you've been exposed to it, and you've been it's been okay. And so as we go through our lives, we carry that trauma with us always, and it's important to kind of recognize that and understand that. In terms of how our organization operates, Mental Health America is part of a national, we are an affiliate in South Florida here, but there are MHAs throughout the United States, and national is based in Washington, D.C. So we operate with the same mission, with the same vision, and it's really peer-based. So we do a lot of peer-based programs. I won't get into all the details of everything, but we work with parents, we work with grandparents and kinship. We've done a lot of work with legal aid in terms of kinship parenting. We have volunteer opportunities for people to do mentoring with children in the schools. We have, some of you may be familiar with an art program called the Nye Muses Art Center, which is a drop-in center for adults, for people with a mental illness, past, present, I like to say, or future. And they come in, really the primary focus of it is for people to connect with one another. So connection is really important, but it's based on the arts. And the art gallery is run by artists. It's not run by therapists or clinical social workers. It's run by artists. So that's the MHA side. About 18 to 24 months ago, we were approached by a small organization called Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was started by a couple of women who had suffered a loss by death by suicide of their sons. So they felt like, what can we do to promote safety and make sure this doesn't happen to another family? So they started it back in the late 90s, and eventually one of the women stayed with it, Jackie Rosen, and she was the executive director up until about 2 years ago, when she and her board approached us and said, would we consider having them merge with us, because they needed the help, and Jackie was looking to retire. So Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention joined us about 2 years ago, and there's a variety of services, and since this is Suicide Awareness Month, let's talk about that. So we have we do groups in schools. We have peer support programs called Hope Sunshine Clubs that are in about 25 schools, middle and high schools in Broward County. It costs the schools nothing. We just need a sponsor, which is usually anybody from the school that's on staff. And the kids actually run the groups, and they're educational groups as well as support groups. So for those kids who may feel like they're a little, they don't quite fit in, or maybe they need a little help, or maybe they just need somewhere safe to go, that's what the Hope Sunshine Clubs are for. So those are ongoing. They're at, like I said, about 25 schools right now. We're always looking to expand it. So that's one of our prevention efforts, and we do a lot of work with the schools. We also have survivor support groups and something called the LOSS team. The LOSS team is actually something very new to us, and it stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. Survivors of suicide are those people who are left behind, not the people who have made attempts. Those are attempters. So the survivors are at a high-risk group. So if it's a family member, we offer support to that family. In fact, if we need to go to the scene of the death by suicide, we'll go to the scene, the house or the car, wherever it may have occurred, if the family wants us to do that. So we offer support from the beginning. You can imagine, let's say it's a husband who died by suicide, and now they have 3 kids, and now this mother is grieving and shocked, and now has things like, who do I call? Like, what do I do next? Like, do I call a funeral home? How do I let his office know? Do I tell them that he died by suicide? Do I just say he just died? Do I make something up? Like all those kind of things that in them become apparent that, I mean, who prepares for that? There's no way to prepare for it, so because it's so shocking, and then you're in the middle of a grief, dealing with the loss of a loved one and trying to understand it, get your head around it. And there's a lot of, considerations in terms of what happens next. So we have this program that, in fact, I'm working with a woman right now who's, she needs help with the cleanup of the scene without being too graphic. I mean, it was pretty awful. And so it has to be cleaned up. And so we have agreements and relationships with cleaning companies, and can help pay for it so that we can help people. So it's one less thing that they have to deal with. That's an example. But things like, how do you talk to, if you're a member of a church, and, some religious organizations are okay and will work with you and offer support, and some are probably not as accommodating for them. So we try to help support those families with it. We also know that survivors of death by suicide are at high risk themselves. So by doing what we call a post-vention, meaning we're only dealing with the survivors after the incident, we're actually doing prevention, because now that we've given them support and hope for a future, that they're less likely to want to die by suicide themselves. So it's really a very aggressive intervention, and we do a lot of referrals out from that program to our local community for treatment services for people to help them additionally with that support. We've done a lot of work with educating the community. In Broward County, last year, we had about 235 suicides, which was about a 10% increase from the year before. The highest year we had in Broward in the last 10 years was 2017 into 18. which was right after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting. And again, that was one of those traumatizing events that impacted the entire community.
Right.
Found that people, even kids in local communities who kind of knew some of the kids or had some familiarity with them, were also dying by suicide. And you might be surprised to hear the largest, the biggest group, if you will, of people who die by suicide is white males between the ages of 40 to 62. And oftentimes when I ask groups that question, a lot of people say, well, it's adolescents and or it's LGBTQ, which it is, but adolescence is not, although it's increasing at an alarming rate. But the issue with that is that's what tends to make the media, is those kinds of stories. So it's something to kind of keep in mind that and the other thing is, okay, so if you're white male between 40 and 62, you think, well, I'm in a high risk group. But the thing with suicide is this: there's not always one way or one series of steps that someone takes. It could be, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's just as likely that it comes out like this. It can be that quick a decision.
Right.
And there was a story of a 13-year-old boy in Broward who was in a school, high achieving kid, straight A's, top of his class, good kid, came from a good family, so on and so forth. And he got expelled from school for selling, I think, a vape pen or something to another kid, and it was against their rules, and he got kicked out. Within, I think, 48 hours, he died by suicide. And there was no indication from anywhere that people thought that would happen. So one of the things that we have to look for is those people that tend to put all their eggs in one basket, and it's particularly vulnerable about young kids or teenagers because they tend to operate that way. They see the world as like right here to right here. As you get older, you see it. It's a lot longer, view of it. But for a kid, it's a really difficult concept to understand. Because you broke up with your girlfriend, because you got kicked out of school, or you got a really bad grade. It's not the end of the world, literally. And so we do a lot of work with, helping people understand that as much as we talk about, the more typical things, depression, of course, is a precursor to potential for death by suicide. The difference being that many, many people who have depression get treatment, and they're in treatment. So they actually, one of the things is you have no way of predicting that you avoid a death by suicide. I mean, how would you track that? There's really no data to say because you did this intervention that prevented that person from dying by suicide. And you notice I also say die by suicide. I don't say commit suicide. And there's a reason for that. It's very purposeful. We have to be careful with our language. When someone dies by suicide, it's not really a choice, even though it might feel like it is. They feel like they have no choice, and that's what it is. So we don't say someone committed a heart attack because they ate French fries and Big Macs every day for their whole lives. So therefore they were waiting for a heart attack, or they smoked, and now they have lung cancer. So they didn't commit lung cancer, they didn't commit heart attack. So we don't commit suicide. It's a process that someone goes through. And the problem is the process can happen over the course of months, over the course of weeks, over the course of hours, over the course of minutes. And that's why, to give you one scenario and say, if you see someone doing this, this, and this, they're definitely going to be, next in line for a death by suicide. It doesn't work that way. And again, that's another reason we can't really track what deaths have been avoided by intervention, because we really don't know. There'd be no way to really accurately track that. So there are a lot of conditions that lead to someone down this road. I mean, we had a call from a family whose relative was terminally ill and knew that the course of his illness was going to be such that he was going to be physically incapacitated while being fully aware consciously of what's happening to him. And he ended up dying by suicide, because he didn't want to face that. So, I mean, that's a clear case. The family was aware of that, and they tried to do everything they could to set up scenarios where he was being watched and so on. But, it's really hard to do that on a day in and day out basis. So even when you know something, you can't always stop.
Right. Well, Paul, I really think that our conversation today and what you've imparted on our audience has at least shown a little bit that the stigma of mental illness, the fact that we could discuss it openly, that we've made a turn in society by open discussions on it, where there was this, I would think it was pervasive, where nobody talked about it. And I think we finally have gotten to a point where people are recognizing that the mind is a part of the body, and the nexus between physical and mental health is imperative and is completely connected. So that being said, everything you've said is greatly appreciated. I see that there is a community effort here with family, with friends, with the people closest to them, with people in schools. I love that you're seeing this through to then the survivors, because I know people who have survived family members who have died by suicide. And you are correct that they are often become those who are then the next who we need to keep an eye on. So, you've got these programs in school, but these kids need to get there. They need to know that it's okay to feel not right mentally. Just like you said, if you're having a heart attack, you're going to run to the emergency room. If you don't feel well mentally, you need to seek help about it, right, immediately. And you said there are many stages of treatment, from medications to therapies, interventions. So since we're kind of getting shy on time, I do want people to know how to avail themselves of your services. How do they get them? Are there walk-ins? Where are you? What's the best way to get to the greatness of services that you all are open to giving to those in need?
The easy answer to that is 211 or 988 is an easy way to pick up the phone and call someone, and they can go up with services anywhere in the county. We do not provide emergency service here at our location. That's really for the mental health facilities. We don't provide health services, so it's important to recognize that. It's more supportive services.
Sure.
And one other thing I just want to mention, and Geraldine, that you kind of tipped it off for me, is no one ever dies by suicide because you asked them. You didn't give them the idea. Trust me, give them the idea. They already have it in their head. If you're thinking, there's a reason, right? So you're not going to, by asking, are you okay? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? It's not going to be like a light goes off in the head and said, oh, I didn't even think of that. Now I'll do it. That doesn't work that way. It really doesn't.
Right. You're right. And I'm glad you brought up 211. And is it 988?
Yes.
Yes, because 988 has recently been implemented, and that is throughout the country now. That's the suicide hotline. Even though, for those who aren't aware of it yet, call 211 and they'll walk you through it. 211 is an exceptional resource, and they know the steps to go through and the questions to ask. So that was really a good resource to put out there. I really do appreciate it. We may have some questions in our comments. I'm not sure yet. Jeff and Tori will let us know. But I do want to thank you. It was really valuable what you said today, and that you've opened up this discussion for anybody who is in need or who knows somebody that might be. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise today. Thank you, Paul. Tori, Jeff, do we have any questions for Paul? they're telling us there are no questions. So Paul, thank you so much for being here. Anytime, please come back with anything that you think might be valuable to spread to our community. We would really appreciate it. And to those of you watching, continue to watch us on Thursdays at noon for Legal Learning on Facebook, Fridays, just like we did today, Fridays with Friends at noon on our Facebook page. You could follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube at coasttocoastlegalaid.org. And you could avail yourself of our services by applying online at Coast to Coast Legal Aid of South Florida. Thank you all so much and stay well.